After taking a battering in the last 2 months of 2016, emerging market currencies have been left in limbo ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. So what's in store for the Forex space this year? Joining me now is Mario Singh. He's a Forex trader and the CEO of Fullerton Markets. Mario, thanks for joining us. Now, Mario, this recent surge we've seen in the dollar index came about after Donald Trump was elected, much to the detriment of a lot of emerging markets currencies. Now, a few hours before the inauguration and perhaps facing a steeper path for rate hikes this year from the U.S. Fed, is there nowhere to go but up for the dollar index this year?
It's interesting you're saying that, I think the markets had a run of exuberance simply because that Trump represented a lot of spending, a lot of job creation, a lot of GDP growth. It was music to the ears of so many traders and investors, in fact, people in the financial markets when he said, I think I'm going to lessen a little bit on regulation and lessen a little bit on taxes, and he's going to complete the entire plan, based on a spending spree. So because of that, the dollar rallied a lot. In fact, as much as $2 trillion actually entered into the equity markets, in the first 5 weeks when Trump literally when he scored the historic win. Having said that, for the last couple of weeks though, ever since Trump had won, and today's inauguration day, the dollar has actually tanked a little bit. And because of that, I guess the markets are a little bit wary. They don't really know what things are going to say. So I think suffice to say the entire world will be watching what Trump has to say on inauguration day.
Speaking of something that Trump recently said, Mario, President-elect Trump recently said that the dollar is too weak, specifically also citing China keeping the yuan low. What might this mean for both the yuan and the currencies of nations with high trade levels with China?
The first thing I'm going to say is that I don't really think he's going to label China a currency manipulator. The two of them have got nothing to gain if they were to enter into a trade war. As it is, the trade deficit that the U.S. has with China is as high as $380 billion. So I don't think anything is going to, no one is going to win out of that. And interestingly enough, right, when Trump actually made those comments, the market reacted by pushing the U.S. dollar down. So I don't think it's anything going to be, it's not going to be a win-win game. In fact, more specifically, China has been doing the exact opposite. They hasn't really been weakening the currency. What they have done, they've actually sold off the forex reserves in terms of propping the yuan because there's just so much capital outflow on the renminbi last year in 2016.
Now, onto the peso now, Mario. Of course, it was the ASEAN currency's worst performer last year, and views are currently a little mixed. Some analysts surveyed by Bloomberg see it as being Asia's most resilient to political risks this year, but the trade deficit here is expected to rise, putting more pressure on our local currency. Your thoughts on where the Philippine peso might be headed in 2017, and perhaps a short-term forecast for where it might end by December?
When I consider all factors, the fact of the matter is I like the Philippines. Although this year many people are saying that in terms of all the ASEAN nations, there's going to be a lot of infrastructure spending in Thailand, in Indonesia, and in Malaysia. But specifically, I like the Philippines. And here's one of the reasons why. They are fairly insulated in terms of geopolitics or what's happening out there. Of course, one of the biggest fears is that with Donald Trump's protectionism agenda, is it ever going to affect the Philippines? Because the U.S. is obviously the largest contributor of FDI into the Philippines. However, that is not going to happen. Number one, he's not going to take such a hard stance and say, I'm going to cut the Philippines out. No. But even if that worst case scenario happens, well, guess what? There are literally two countries on the white horse that's stepping in to say, hey, we do want to invest in the Philippines. And that is Japan and China. And these two countries themselves have committed as much as $33 billion into the Philippines. So although I see some headwinds in the peso, it may go as high to 51 to the dollar. Having said that, I think towards the second half of this year, you'll start to see the peso strengthening again.
Now, Mario, of course, with slowing global trade we're seeing and the potential stronger dollar with more rate hikes perhaps from Janet Yellen and company, there are issues that this dollar might actually be too strong. In midst of this perceived atmosphere, are there any particular trades or currency pairs that you might be keeping an eye on that might actually benefit or survive these perceived turbulent times ahead?
So everyone is again watching what's going to happen on Inauguration Day. But in terms of where the company is, we're taking a short-term view in terms of that the US dollar will be strengthening. In fact, after Janet Yellen had hiked rates 25 basis points, the US dollar over a 3-month period will now start to edge up. I like the place of the euro versus the US dollar and US dollar versus the Japanese yen when it comes to Forex. And here's the reason why. Europe and Japan are still moving towards a loose monetary policy. The US is already on a tightening scale. So I'm looking for euro dollar to come down, possibly between 102 to 103. Today it stands at about 106. So that's going to be a short play in terms of shorting the euro dollar. On the flip side, for the dollar yen, similar position because the US dollar might be on a high in terms of rising against the Japanese yen. Today the dollar yen is about, I think, 114. We should be looking anywhere between 116 to 117 over the next 3 months.
Now, what other potential headwinds might we be seeing in the Forex space out there, Mario, that might either affect the peso either positively or negatively?
Definitely, we got to be looking at 3 countries. The US, how the US is going to respond. Number 2, Japan, and number 3, China. So in this particular space, I think the focus would be now more on China. In terms of GDP growth, China and Philippines are about fairly similar. They probably ended 2016 at about 6.7, 6.8%. So I would see in terms of how the external countries are faring, that gives us one part of the clue. Second part of the clue would be how President Duterte would actually keep up all his promises. In a sense, he has committed to say he would be spending 8 trillion pesos over the economy, right, over the next 6 years at least into his term. So we'll see how that happens. And that's a lot of money. That's like 160 billion US dollars. So while they are on a ride towards consumer spending, I think there needs to be a balance between internal economies and the external economies to see how that is going to prop up the peso.
So possible higher rates in the U.S. and promises to be kept here locally. Mario Singh from Fullerton Markets, thank you again for joining us from Singapore.